From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome to All Things with Kim Strassel, a Wall Street Journal opinion podcast. And I am so thrilled to say that my guest this week is Senator John Barrasso of Wyoming, recently elected Senate Whip. That's the number 2 position in the leadership ranks. And also thrilled that we have him here at such a busy and buzzing time in the Capitol. Senator, welcome.
Well, it's great to be with you, Kim. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm going to jump right in here. We recently had a Senate leadership election, and for the first time in 17 years, Republicans are going to have a new face at the top of their party, having elected John Thune to that position and moving you up to the whip position. How are things going to be different in the Senate under your leadership and his? How are they going to be the same? What should we expect?
Well, the big difference is we're now in the majority. We have 53 senators from the Republican side as a result of a tremendous outpouring of the American people to elect Donald Trump and to elect 53 Republican senators. And we could have been even higher. So many of these other 4 races were very close, could have gone anyway in the battleground states. So we're really looking forward to have a solid working majority. And we're going to have the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. He's going to be Vice President in case we ever need him to break a tie. We have one of our members leaving the Senate to join the administration as Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. So there's just a lot of optimism about our ability to work together with a majority in the House, a smaller majority in the House, and President Trump in the White House to really get America back on track with a new leadership team in the Senate committed to the future of our country.
One of the things that I know a lot of the senators talked about and were looking into as they went to do those votes for the Senate leadership was this question. There had been some grumpiness over they felt too many decisions being made in the top back offices and a real demand to have more work done through the committees and amendments on the floor. That all sounds really great, and I'm all for that kind of regular order. At the same time, how do you manage that given you got 53 senators, but you're going to need a lot of unity to get this big agenda done?
Well, we are going to need to do that because when we're having our meetings on reconciliation, which are the ways to get things done without needing the 60 votes in the Senate, but just with 51 in the House majority as well and the president's signature, we know we need to be unified as a conference. That involves passing a budget and then working on the areas in which we are concerned and work on that President Trump is in unity with. And right now, the Wall Street Journal had an editorial about the reconciliation fight that's coming. We want to make sure that we focus on national security, which is border security. It's American strength, and then also high costs. Because if there's a reason that we won, and we understand that we won this election running against the Democrats, a party of high prices and open borders, we promised to do things about both of those. And the area where you can really focus on high prices is with affordable energy. So we want to, in the first number of days, in the first month, actually before President's Day, to have on the floor, ready to pass, and if not signed into law, a bill that deals with those issues of national security, the border, and unleashing American energy. And what President Trump has talked about, and I just met with Doug Burgum, who's going to be the incoming Secretary of Interior. I met with Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy, coming in, is having basically an all-of-government approach of everyone who's involved with energy. So you have the Department of Energy, Department of Interior, EPA, FERC, the Regulatory Commission, all working together to make sure that we can once again make America energy dominant, because energy is the master resource, and we can protect the environment without punishing the economy. Biden and his team and Kamala Harris didn't understand that, but we believe the way to a strong America across the globe is based on American energy.
I do want to talk to you about energy and those nominees that you mentioned, but just on reconciliation. So Senator Thune has laid out this strategy for reconciliation. And just to remind listeners, this is a particular means by which you use budget reconciliation, and it allows the Senate to pass legislation with a simple majority of 51 votes. And he's laying out a plan. It's a 2-prong approach. You get 2 bites at that reconciliation apple next year. So the first one as you just noted, you'd use for border and energy and defense dollars, and the second one for tax policy. I think that makes a lot of sense. And as you noted, we wrote an editorial saying why we thought that made a lot of sense. There has been some pushback from House members in particular about the order here. I think some of them are worried taxes might get left behind. But explain the thinking behind that strategy that the Senate has laid out.
Well, we want to make sure we get this tax policy done right. And that is going to take a little more time, as one would expect. Plus, the real fear was that we want to stop this $4 trillion tax increase that the Democrats were proposing, because we want to extend the tax cuts from 2017 and the Jobs Act from then, which arguably has given us in this country the best economy in my lifetime. Those things don't expire, though, Kim, until the end of 2025. So we have enough time to get it right. President Trump on the campaign trail made a number of promises and commitments and issues that are not in that original bill. We have to see how we can blend those all together. But what we ran on, what people are expecting from President Trump and this administration and a Republican Senate and a Republican House, are solutions to the issues of their life, which are high prices and an open border. People want to be safe in their own neighborhoods. They want to be able to afford energy to heat their home, to drive. And we feel that that's the best thing, is to go with that first, get that done. Not that it's easier, but it's simpler to explain and to work through. And then the more complicated issues related to all of the tax codes are things that we have a little time to work on, because those things don't change until the end of the next year.
We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, more with Senator John Barrasso. Welcome back. I'm Kim Strassel, and I am here this week with John Barrasso, the senator from Wyoming. Let me talk to you a little bit about reconciliation, and in particular, energy. You know a great deal about energy. You are a big advocate for it in the Senate. And one thing I'm trying to understand in this budget reconciliation bill, as you know, there are rules that govern the budget reconciliation process. It makes it kind of hard to do policy in these bills. It's supposed to be more about budgetary issues, spending cuts. That makes a lot of sense. It's pretty obvious how that would all work when it comes to some of President Trump and Republicans' ideas on the border. You know, we obviously need more dollars for border enforcement, et cetera. I know that there's some talk about maybe putting some more money into defense buildup. But what's the energy piece of that package? What are some of the things that you guys are thinking about?
Well, we want to do things related to infrastructure as well in permitting, and also to allow the sales of oil and gas and the leases, the offshore, the onshore. There are things that are part of the law that this past administration has just not even been doing. You know, they're supposed to offer for sale leases for oil and gas exploration, offshore, onshore, in Alaska, all of those areas which do have a significant revenue component to them. And you're right, they're budgetary components of reconciliation. It has to be for budgetary rather than policy. And so much of what we're trying to do from a budgetary standpoint is just going along the lines of complying with the laws as if they have been written years ago. So we're going to continue to work on all of those components of energy, get rid of this pause that President Biden has had on exporting liquefied natural gas. All of those issues are related to energy, and we're going to try to push as far as we can to do as much of that as possible in reconciliation.
Yeah, there's a lot to be done. As you undoubtedly saw, one of the administration's announcements this week was this, dare I say, bogus lease sale in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Congress mandated that they were meant to hold these sales. This is one that they look to have designed purposely to fail. That's what Alaska Governor Mike Dunleavy said. You mentioned you met with Doug Burgum, Trump's pick for the Interior. I know you said you met with Chris Wright, a really innovative entrepreneur in the energy sector. Having spoken to both of them, what do you see coming from them right off the bat from an energy perspective, if and when they are confirmed?
Well, they understand that the issue of American energy and American strength are completely bound together. In the global picture right now, with China. If you listen to President Xi, he talks about the future belongs to whoever can do the most with artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence requires supercomputers, which require massive amounts of energy. And we've had hearings in the Senate specifically related to that. Joe Manchin and I working together on the Energy Committee. And if we have trouble with China in the future because of AI, it's not going to be because they outthink us. We know that they steal our trade secrets. It's because they are so focused on their energy supply at a time when we've been dealing with an administration for the last 4 years has really had our energy producers in handcuffs. They've made it very difficult for us to develop all sources of energy that were not just renewable energy, and we need it all. So China continues to bring on board one new coal-fired power plant, almost one a week. They're continuing massive amounts of new energy to power their supercomputers. Well, we haven't been able to do that here, and that's why the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the National Energy Reliability Commission, the people that look at these things are very concerned about our ability to even keep enough energy on the grid, let alone deal with what we need in the long term. And even the New York Times had a story a couple of months ago that talked about with the increased needs of energy in our country because of electrification, data centers, AI, and even people wanting electric vehicles, all of those things, the amount of energy we're going to need 5 years from now, Kim, is equal to adding an entire new California of energy demand. And we have to be able to keep up and go beyond that so we can have enough affordable energy for the people of our nation, as well as to be able to compete with China long term.
I couldn't agree more. This is such a priority. We are woefully behind, and we have such resources here. And we saw that during the last Trump administration, the power, not just in terms of fulfilling our own needs, but also what it meant in terms of a national security perspective for us to become such an important producer out there. Let me ask you, another thing that Donald Trump has announced he's going to do is create this National Energy Council. Doug Burgum is going to chair it. The idea behind it, and I understand it, is to get all of these agencies working together to streamline some of this work. I'm just going to ask, I've seen proposals like this in the past. How do we cut the red tape? How do we make this work faster? I've never seen them come to much. What do you think this council is going to do differently?
Doug Burgum came to our Senate conference lunch today, and he spoke specifically to that. We had just about all of the 53 Republican senators there. The newer members weren't there because they don't get sworn in until January 3rd. But he talked about all of the different groups coming together, including the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, to try to eliminate any of the roadblocks so we can very smoothly work through this. President Trump has always been a disruptor, and he's been very successful as a result of it. In addition to this National Energy Council, we have the DOGE, which Vivek and Elon Musk are working on. They're coming up with ways as well to see what we can do in terms of making government work better. We have a big bloated government right now, how to shrink the size of government, make it work more efficiently. All of those things are tied together. So it does seem that we are going to really hit the ground running. When you take a look at this term of President Trump going in, compared to the first time, they say now he knows where all the rattlesnakes are. He knows where the problems lie. And he's really, in terms of putting his cabinet forward, doing it much quicker in terms of getting a team together and knowing what to attack where the problems are. It does seem to me that this is really at an advanced level that we haven't seen before. And I'm really happy and looking forward to what the president and the Senate and the House working together can accomplish.
Yeah, as you note, some of that delay when it comes to these really important projects is bureaucracy and red tape, the government. Some of it, though, is legislative, or I should say, rather, groups who've learned to exploit some of our laws as a way to shut down these projects. You mentioned permitting reform. You have worked with Senator Manchin very hard this year. I believe you guys released a bill in July, and it went through committee with a really strong committee vote. Where does that stand?
It passed the committee 15-4. And it's interesting because this is to try to get permitting advancing for all energy projects as well as transmission lines. So I always say we don't just need to produce more energy. We need more lines from which to transmit that energy to where it's needed. We're still trying to get that through in this session of Congress. We have to get it through the House. It's funny because I think the Bernie Sanders of the world could call this bill a Frankenstein's monster because of the things that it will allow to do. And I call it a good start in terms of what we need to do to make sure we are producing the energy and have the ability to transmit it, the ability to also have the infrastructure, not just to produce it. But the interesting thing, and you didn't ask about this, Kim, so we have an administration that is leaving office, and I think is just doing awful things right now. There was a story in the New York Times this week, $400 billion U.S. office races to get loans out the door.
Yeah.
Well, this is a green energy group. We had a meeting of the Doge with Vivek and Elon. They were here in the Senate and in the House. What the administration is doing with 11th hour actions. The rate of spending from this administration after they lost November 5th has gone up dramatically. The number of rules they're coming out with, they're doing that. In terms of signing long-term contracts, holding the government to responsibilities, not on things that you or I or the incoming administration would support, but what the group that just got kicked out of office wants to turn long-term. Government should be there to serve the people, and we're looking for some tools to allow special scrutiny on what this administration is doing during this final hour in office.
Yeah, I think it's just so important. We're going to take one more break. When we're back, more with Senator John Barrasso.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is All Things with Kim Strassel, a Potomac Watch podcast.
Welcome back. Let me go back again to the agenda. You guys are going to come roaring into the Senate. And by the way, I congratulate you and Senator Thune, too, because you were right. I think the incoming Trump administration does have a plan for how to hit the ground and running. You guys look to have that as well, too. There seems to be a lot of forward planning going into the first couple of months. You're going to have a lot of things you've got to get through. Obviously, confirmation hearings and votes to get nominees in office. This very ambitious first reconciliation bill, which I have heard people saying they'd like to have by the end of January or the beginning of February. As you noted, a longer-term plan for tax overhaul. But what else do you see as the priorities for 2025 from a congressional perspective?
The whole goal we talk about is getting the country back on track. And to do that, we need to, one, make sure that President Trump has his cabinet confirmed and around him, get his team on the ground so they can start hitting the ground early. We put out a very aggressive schedule where they think about when does Congress go on recess or take a break. Well, our schedule has us working the first 11 weeks straight through. The new members get sworn in on the 3rd. Starting Monday the 6th, we start with hearings on the nominees that President Trump has called into for his cabinet. Now, he doesn't get sworn in until January 20th, but we hope to have a number of these through the process so we can actually vote on their confirmation on January 20th. So people may be going to inaugural balls. I think that the Senate is going to be working to try to get members of President Trump's cabinet confirmed that day. Additionally, and Lindsey Graham is the chairman of the Budget Committee. We've been having meetings already. He wants to get a budget passed and done before President Trump is inaugurated so that we can then start immediately after the inauguration and work on the reconciliation to try to get that done before President's Day. We'll see how that goes, but that's the intent, to, in February, get that first reconciliation bill done. On the tax bill, we've been meeting for months on that. Mike Crapo, chairman of the Finance Committee, all the Republicans in the Finance Committee, laying the groundwork of what we would like to do, knowing that we'd want to be ready if we were fortunate enough to win the House, the White House, and the Senate. Because if you don't have all three, you can't use reconciliation because you need all three together. And we're fortunate, thanks to the American people voting in November, to give us that we feel much more ready to go because we've been meeting through the end of the summer and into the fall to be prepared going into 2025.
Do you think this is a little bit of a personal hobby horse of mine, just because every year we watch Washington and Washington fundamentally fails to do its appropriations process? We end up with these omnibuses at the end of the year. You folks are doing a continuing resolution to continue funding the government until I think March of next year. It looks like that's what it's going to come. But is there any shot that under this Republican House and Republican Senate that you are actually going to go through that process of funding government, 12 appropriations bills, conferences between the chambers?
Absolutely, and here's why. And I talk about the difference in terms of us in the majority or them in the majority. So the Appropriations Committee will be chaired by Susan Collins of Maine. She has been preparing for this her entire time in the Senate. She talked about it last night, talked about it today, has been talking about it for months. They're going to do 12 appropriations bills. Under Patty Murray, who's the current chair the committee did do 12 bipartisan appropriations bills. And wouldn't you believe it, Kim? Chuck Schumer refused to bring them to the Senate floor because he was more interested in trying to confirm very liberal judges to lifetime appointments on district courts, circuit courts, and fill a number of judgeships rather than do the business of the people, which were the appropriations. But we could have passed 12 appropriations bills bipartisan this year if the majority leader had allowed us to get them to the floor. With John Thune as the leader, me as the whip, we have committed, working with Susan Collins, the incoming chair of the Appropriations Committee, to get all 12 of her bills to the floor of the United States Senate. I expect that they're going to be bipartisan and they're going to work well, and we want to get those to the House as well.
You look ahead over the next year. I mean, you're talking about all the accomplishments, et cetera, but you just mentioned Chuck Schumer not putting any bills on the floor. You guys are going to run the House and the Senate and the White House. But what's your biggest worry about the other side and what could happen to maybe get in the way of some of these plans?
Well, who was a British Prime Minister? Events, dear boy, events. I had the nominee to be Secretary of Treasury came in to see me last week. And I don't know if you know him or worked with him before. Scott is terrific. And he said, what do you think? What should we be looking out for? And I said, when I talk to student groups and talk to others, I said, there's a book. You don't need to read the book. You just need to know the title. And the title of the book is Inevitable Surprises. Always another thing that happens, another surprise, something you wouldn't ever expect or ever see coming. Here we are. Syria has just fallen. Assad is in Russia. If you asked me 2 weeks ago if that had been the case, would I have expected that? No. So there are inevitable surprises. So I mentioned this to the incoming Secretary of Treasury, and he said, it's interesting. I gave a full speech on that, and he sent me a copy of the speech I'm looking forward to reading, just about, the unexpected things that happen as you plan and think you got everything under control and you think you know what's going to happen. You just never know. There's always another surprise. It's inevitable, but it's going to happen, and you just have to be prepared. You want to be resilient. You want to be flexible, and we have to prepare for that, for the future of our nation and the success of our country.
Yeah, in those words from those Harry Potter books, some of my favorite, constant vigilance. So
yes.
Thank you, Senator Barrasso, so much for coming in and spending some time with us. We want to thank our listeners. If you like the show, please hit subscribe, and you can write to us at pwpodcast@wsj.com.